In David Stewart's video, Books to Get You into Fantasy, he recommended this book, which is Elric of Melnibone by Michael Moorcock. Because of the complicated nature of the release formats and dates, I wasn't sure which would be the best point to join the series, but this book, published in 1972 in the UK, was the first Elric novel. However, it did serve as a prequel to previously published short stories. Now, it may well impact how the book is received. A lot of prequels, just like sequels, rely on the pre-existing material to add emotional impact to scenes that would otherwise have none. The theme of fate, which is particularly important to this book, and of course knowledge of that fate, may add impact to the text that by starting here I've missed out on. Elric is Emperor of Melnibone, a largely reclusive, mysterious kingdom, some centuries removed from being the most dominant force on the planet. As a sickly albino, Elric requires both drugs and sorcery simply to survive, and as such is considered a weak and introspective ruler in a kingdom that values strength and force of will. Elric's chief rival is this guy. How do you pronounce that? No idea. I can see what Moorcock was going for, making his character names unfamiliar to create a sense of inhuman or exotic around the Melniboneans, but this is unpronounceable. Elric loves Cimmeril. Cimmeril is this guy's sister, and she loves him back. There's no real struggle here. In 191 pages, Moorcock simply doesn't have the time or the room to explore every fantasy trope. What is interesting, given Moorcock's campaign against the depiction of women in the Gore series, which I'm not familiar with, is that Cimmeril really doesn't contribute anything beyond being a damsel in need of rescue. This book is split into 3 books. In the first book, Elric and co fight barbarian raiders while this guy plots to usurp the Ruby Throne. In the second book, this guy flees Elric's justice with a kidnapped Cimmeril in tow. And in this one, Moorcock indulges a little Tolkien whimsy, particularly with the boat that sails on land and water and the squabbling of the gods over who actually owns the boat. The deals that Elric makes with the Chaos Gods hints at something darker to come. Perhaps more well-read readers would already be familiar with that, of course. The third book is the weaker of the 3. It starts slowly, but the final duel between Elric and this guy, in which Elric wins the Runeblade Stormbringer, is worth a slight dip in quality to that point. The only Tolkien I've read so far is The Hobbit, and though this book is aimed at a slightly more mature audience, it does have a similar zest. Its lean narrative packs a lot of punch into a pretty slim volume. Elric is a fairly well-developed character, attempting to change Melniboneans' traditions while being drawn into vengeance and wrath. Nobody else really contributes much beyond standard foil and damsel. The magic and gods obviously expanded further in the many sequels, hints at a grander scale than just man versus man for the love of a woman, though many good books have been written on that premise, and this is another example of that. The sense of predestiny permeates a lot of the narrative, and there's certainly a suggestion that Elric and Cimmeril are aware of their fates, and this naturally will remind some readers of the Iliad. While there is a direct connection with the extended similes like those on screen at the moment, I found this further developed in the text by the sense of repetition. In part, Moorcock achieves this by giving everything a name. The Ruby Throne is not a Ruby Throne, it's the Ruby Throne. So you'll find this phrase and others similar to it dotted throughout the text, which naturally people will be familiar with from Games of Thrones, for example. Certainly this adds a sense of poetry, but after a while it begins to lose some of that power, and instead of feeling rhythmic, it just begins to feel a little monotonous. When you repeat something in literary proximity, i.e. in the same sentence or the same paragraph, it tends to look deliberate and therefore be indicative of good writing. We see this on page 85, where Moorcock uses the Ruby Throne as the object of 2 sentences that both begin paragraphs. When it happens over many pages, like the examples on screen now, it appears less deliberate and tends to indicate poor writing. And Elric is a little bit of a mixed bag, although I do tend to err more on the side of good writing than bad. Moorcock uses words like the precious, being both poetic and intricate. The descriptions of characters and place are evocative, but they could never really be described as realist. Moorcock uses 10 words where other writers might use a whole chapter. And while this does help the book move along at a brisk pace, perhaps fans of George R.R. Martin and similar work may find the pace and the restrained prose to be not to their liking. As a fan of somebody like David Gemmell, for example, though, I found it to be both familiar and refreshing. However, by the third book, Moorcock's style seems to be a little over-repetitive, and it is the weakest section of the book. As it should be ramping up to its finale, instead it kind of limps and labours along, though the final battle between Elric and his cousin, this guy, is worth the wait. The sentient sword trope is familiar, and Moorcock handles it well, so that the duel does provide a satisfying ending. In conclusion, with the similarities to Tolkien, Gemmell, and even Homer, there's a lot to enjoy in a tightly packed and energetic novel. Fans of more realist or detailed styles of writing may find this simplistic and interesting only as a piece of nostalgic curiosity. Readers new to fantasy, and young readers particularly, can find a lot of worse places to begin their exploration of the genre. I enjoyed it, and the ultimate test, I guess, is whether I'd be prepared to read a sequel. Obviously, if you've watched my other videos, you'll see that I am usually reluctant, but the shortness of this novel and its undoubted strengths do make it more likely than most. The slight dip in quality in the third book, and that feeling that perhaps the repetition had gone a little too far, might suggest that this book does not lend itself to binge reading quite so well as other series do. Thank you for watching my review of Elric of Melnibone. There are other videos on my channels. There's likes, dislikes, there's subscribes, there's bells to ring, there's comments to leave. All of that as your heart sees fit. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.